is a grim and dreary place on planet Earth, a museum of the Russian world and Soviet legacy under the open sky Transnistria. Or, as the authorities of this unrecognized entity proudly call themselves, the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic.
The Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic is a country that technically does not exist.
30 years ago, Russia forcibly tore Transnistria away from Moldova and turned it into a Soviet ghetto, with the smell of sugar ration coupons and rusting Lenins on every corner.
You know this guy, don't you? If you don't, well, you should definitely check out my last video. We'll see it.
It feels as if the PMR fell out of a time machine while it was moving. Transnistria is a grim social experiment on living people, where the subjects are forced to suffer and endure not for a brighter future, but for the sake of nostalgia for the past.
What do you think will happen in the future?
How do you think perhaps this situation should be resolved? Who is to blame for this situation?
I know, I've been around since the Soviet Union, I live there, and well, I know that this will be resolved one way or another.
So the main ideology of Transnistria is not to progress, but to freeze at the Soviet settings of the GKCP era.
But for some reason, everyone is leaving. If they're not leaving, they really want to. Some go to Moscow, some to Chisinau, others to Europe.
For 30 years, this unviable entity has existed thanks to smuggling, handouts from Moscow, and free gas transported through Ukraine. Throughout its entire history, the PMR has not paid a single kopeck for this gas, and it is precisely this that has kept the territory of the Russian world afloat, along with all its toads and vipers in power.
Attention! Stand at attention for the welcoming ceremony. To the right, march! Comrade Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic, the honor guard for the New Year's address is now assembled.
But on January honest, 2025, the gas pot stopped cooking. Ukraine stopped the transit of Russian gas to Europe, including to Transnistria.
Oh. My faithful friend. It's just the two of us left. We've been through so much together, and you've truly never let me down. I sincerely hope you'll be in good hands. We'll meet again, somewhere, someday.
In the communist paradise, the heating in all the homes was shut off at once, returning Transnistria to its Soviet roots, when gas was only found in lamps and in Lenin's head.
January honest, 2025. Good morning, Transnistria. It's good thing Dad didn't let us dismantle this stove when we were renovating or heat with it.
Traditional and homey. In the region, almost 72,000 private households were left without gas, and 150 gas boiler houses were shut down. For some reason, the authorities of the pseudo-republic were unprepared for this, even though Ukraine had long since announced it would stop gas transit.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed that Ukraine is not considering renewing the agreement with Gazprom on the transit of Russian gas to Europe.
The authorities in Transnistria had time to find other options for gas or switch to alternative energy sources. But apparently, the PMR supporters were hoping that Russia would drop free gas to them from airplanes, or at the very least, send it over the internet. But the people of Transnistria didn't take into account that Russia always abandons its own, and that's exactly what happened.
Since yesterday, the heating has been turned off. The only exception is hospitals. Some of them are still running on gas from the boiler. Some generators are running, like at the Republican Clinical Hospital. Not all hospitals are working. They're trying to optimize as much as possible.
All enterprises in Transnistria have also come to a halt. The situation is so critical that factories can't even ship out products they've already manufactured.
The crisis is currently so severe that there's really no need to list which enterprises have stopped operating. All industrial enterprises have come to a complete standstill, except for those involved in food production, that is, those directly ensuring the ongoing food security of Transnistria. For all other enterprises for the entire industrial sector. There are simply no energy resources available at all.
There was a time when the separatists proudly proclaimed that Transnistria was feeding Moldova. Apparently, that's just a running joke among all separatists.
Donbass won't stop.
Now, the people of Transnistria are asking Chisinau to pay for their gas and help them not to freeze. This is called wanting to have your cake and eat it too, or here. Wanting to eat the fish and sniff the gas. I want to be independent, but at your expense.
So this, what should we call it? The cancerous tumor of Moldova is Transnistria, occupied by the Russians. And as it turns out, for 30 years, they haven't paid a damn thing for gas. So Gazprom was paying for them. So either the Russians were paying for them or Moldova was paying for them. But it shouldn't have been done this way, with Moldova paying for these comrades who, in the end, aren't comrades to them at all.
Gas can be supplied to the left bank of the Dniester, not only from Gazprom.
So Moldova can purchase this gas from traders, including for the left bank?
Yes, absolutely. But a question arises, will the so-called left bank actually be able to pay the real price for the gas it consumes?
Well, you know the answer, Mr. Antoy. You know that note.
Cutting off the gas had a very strong impact on the psychological and political state of the people in Transnistria. Once upon a time, these remnants of the Russian world loved to gloat over how Ukraine and Europe would freeze without Russian gas. Here's an example of one individual who was having fun when Ukraine experienced its first blackout in 2022. And now, what is that very same individual from Transnistria writing? Well, that's it. We're without gas. At 7 in the morning, all the boiler houses across the Republic were shut down. I don't even know what'll happen next.
What is this, huh?
Well, we can guess what's going to happen. A new dish will appear. Frozen shchi. Let's be honest. We weren't the first to start with the irony. There's a nuance. In Ukraine, during blackouts, people were freezing not because they were waiting for free gas, but because they were being bombed. And in Transnistria, the Vatniks are freezing because they created a fake stillborn entity.
What is dead may never truly die. What is dead may never ever die.
It's sad that, along with the fanatical supporters of the Russian world and the devotees of the hammer and sickle, ordinary residents of the PMR Moldovans, Ukrainians, Gagauzare also suffering. Moscow has been holding all of them hostage for 30 years with a single goal to destabilize the region and prevent normal life from taking root there.
On the 232nd anniversary of the founding of the city of Tiraspol, we honor not only its glorious history, but also all those who gave the most precious thing, their lives for the peaceful future of our homeland.
When the USSR collapsed, Moscow did in Moldova exactly what it did in Donbass. With Russia's support, separatists declared the independence of Transnistria and began an armed struggle against Chisinau. The scheme was perfected back then. Volunteers and Cossacks from Russia fought on the side of the miners and tractor drivers of Transnistria. Even the characters were the same.
In general, Strelkov's story about himself allows us to paint a portrait of a nomad who has devoted his life to warfare. He moves from one war to another. Ukraine, Chechnya, and before that, the Balkans, Transnistria.
The war in Moldova was declared under the usual slogans: fighting fascists and defending traditional Russian values.
Officially, the 14th Army maintained neutrality. In fact, she was one of the active parties to the conflict. It was from the 14th Army's depots that the separatists received their weapons. Officers, special forces and armored vehicles of the 14th Army fought against Moldovan government forces and police. Artillery systems were handed over to the separatists. In June, Moldovan government forces had almost completely taken Bender, but Moscow intervened. On June 23, the commander of the 14th Army, General Alexander Lebed, openly stated that he would, in fact, defend Transnistria by any means necessary.
I wonder what it was like for the residents of Bender to fight against the Banderites. That's a rhetorical question. The main question is, why was this bloodshed even necessary? Why was an entire region forcibly sealed up like canned stew in an old Soviet jar? People were torn away from the civilized world. Entire generations condemned to live outside the law, with a piece of paper instead of a passport. Like a carrot on a stick, they were always promised that the Soviet Union would return. And if it didn't, then Russia would never abandon them.
Yes, who else would? Of course! Of course! Of course!
In the end, the Soviet system never really went away. And Moscow doesn't need this appendix of the Russian world even for free, because as part of Russia, it holds no interest. They only need it as a military base, like the one in Syria. Now that it's become impossible to supply this base, it's lost its value. The Z-Patriots, you no longer hear talk about breaking through a corridor to Transnistria, because all their breakthroughs already broke through when they were supposed to take Kyiv in 3 days and reach the borders of Donetsk region in a week.
In a hot war, we would defeat Ukraine in 2 days. Why defeat it? Ukraine.
Now, in Transnistria, people are openly disappointed with where they live. And most importantly, where is this whole cart moving? After 30 years of Soviet-style stagnation, the residents suddenly voted for a new trend. No, not for European values, but for a monarchist imperialist. In other words, they just swapped one dead ideology for another dead ideology. But the direction of the fall into the abyss hasn't changed.
Hello. Greetings. And congratulations. The holiday today is in honor of Saint Savas of Strozzi, the name day of our bishop, and also on your not thank you.
The current president of Transnistria adores Russian Tsars, erects monuments to them, and hosts balls. And he also dreams of restoring the Russian Empire.
And then the waltz began. The guys, unlike their partners, are inexperienced dancers, but a month of rehearsals has paid off. Almost no one misses a step, and everyone keeps to the rhythm. In the middle of the hall, an exemplary married couple gives a masterclass. The president and the first lady are waltzing too.
The guardsmen, against the backdrop of an old panel building, perfectly illustrate what the Russian Empire would look like if it had survived to this day. Actually, if the Russian Empire were to be restored within the borders of Transnistria, I think no one would object. Except for the reasonable residents of Transnistria.
If necessary, we will have to help the left bank. We'll have to help because there are, how many people are there? 250,000 people, 300,000 people. But the vast majority, likely over 90%, are citizens of Moldova whom we need to care for.
The residents of Transnistria must finally honestly admit to themselves that they have been cruelly deceived, that they have been deprived of a future, that their right to a normal life has been taken away from them. And it was Moscow that did this. Not through someone else's hands, but directly. Transnistrians are not living poorly by accident, but because the Kremlin is doing this deliberately. It needs a poor, inert, obedient region. And until Transnistrians send Moscow and its Soviet imperial ideology packing along with Russian gas, their troubles will only keep growing. Transnistria now has every chance to rid itself of the pseudo-empire and turn from a rusty Soviet museum into a prosperous region.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.